So in this segment, I really want to zoom in on how to create that sustainable funding specifically for community college connected apprenticeship programs. And a really important starting point in here is understanding that there's a few different levels at which a community college can be involved in and running apprenticeship programs. And I've attempted to summarize here kind of those different levels. There are ways that an apprenticeship program and a LEA, in this case, the community college, can have a relationship. And the level one is just where the community college is really just an instructional partner, in which case the apprentices are enrolling in classes that are offered at the college. It's a very light touch situation. I think the most common scenarios are the level 2 and the level 3. Level 2, I think, is the most common scenario, especially in our building and fire trades apprenticeship programs, but also in some of our IACA programs, right? These programs that are in all the other sectors of our economy outside of the building and fire trades. And this is where the community college is the LEA partner, sort of overseeing the education, sometimes delivering the education, but fundamentally the program sponsor is some other entity. And the LEA is providing that instructional oversight and also playing the role of a funding partner. And in this scenario, for example, like the RSI funding would be flowing through the college. So that's a level 2. And then the level 3 is more rare, but I think happening more and more, where the community college is playing that role of the program sponsor and really running the whole apprenticeship program. And so I'm going to really be focusing here on this level 2 and level 3 scenario that we're talking about here. So when you're thinking about running an apprenticeship program in a community college, there's a few different areas of cost. There's the employer's cost, which is really about apprenticeship wages, benefits, the mentorship on the job, right? And then there's the cost of being the program sponsor and being the intermediary and really running the program and aggregating the needs of multiple employers, sourcing, placing, supporting apprentices, all of that work. And then there's the actual classroom training portion of the apprenticeship. So when we think about these different cost categories, we're layering on top of that some of the potential funding sources that could cover these different areas. And typically employers are going to pick up the wages, although there's this LEAP funding that I'll talk a little bit more about that could be a wage offset. There's DOL funding, philanthropy funding. Really, in thinking about the intermediary cost, we have the Apprenticeship Innovation Funding, California Apprenticeship Initiative grants. I'll touch more on each of these here. Strong workforce funding. And then for the training portion, there's a few different ways that we here in the state of California can cover the training of apprentices in community college apprenticeship programs. One is RSI funding that's utilized a lot by our building and fire trades programs. There's the Apprenticeship Innovation Funding training, which again, I'll talk a little bit more about. And then very importantly, there's the FTES funding. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but this really can pretty much fully cover the cost of the training portion of things. So in this, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more on thinking about how to get new programs up and off the ground and funded and scaling towards sustainability. So when I do that, I'm further narrowing the categories, and I would encourage folks to look at the additional video that we've done around an overview of different apprenticeship funding sources to kind of understand this picture more. But I'm zooming in particularly here around the topic of community colleges, and particularly around new programs in community colleges. So when you look at this, it's not just about what covers what costs, but also at what stage of the program. So this is the same set of acronyms, but really from the lens of what funding can you use to get going, and then what funding can you use to sustain and scale your program. And for getting a program started, I recommend looking towards California Apprenticeship Initiative grants, which I'll talk more about in a moment, and also DOL grants. And then I think strong workforce funding can play a role in sustaining it. We also have this new funding mechanism called AIF that can help for helping with that sustain and scale equation of apprenticeship funding. And then on the training side of things, we have both FTES and the AIFT funding. And I think the AIFT funding could help, with that earlier, more agile course, covering the course costs while you get those courses for your new apprenticeship program to become 4-credit classes, which of course is the goal for many reasons. And then you're able to tap into that FTES funding. So I wanted to touch a little bit more on some details on these different funding sources. So for getting a new program up and off the ground, I think California Apprenticeship Initiative grants are fantastic. And the latest framework from the Chancellor's office as to how this funding has gone out is 3 different categories of funding: a planning funding, implementation, and expansion funding. And the planning grant is up to $120K. And the idea of this is what it sounds like, right? It's to help do the planning to explore getting a new program started. And this is for that really early stage and to get to the stage of registering your program with us. And we recognize that there's a lot of stakeholder engagement that happens to get to that stage. And so this is really trying to offset the costs of that planning phase. And then next is an implementation grant, which it's up to $1.5 million in funding. And that's for once you have your program registered with DAS and helping to really launch that program. And then finally, there is the expansion grant, which is up to $1 million worth of funding. And this is really to think about the one-time activities to help a program grow in a big way. So these are grants that can help you get a program planned and launched. And then we hope that this new apprenticeship innovation funding becomes part of that sustain and scale part of your equation. So there's 2 categories to apprenticeship innovation funding. There is the AIF support funding, which is really to think about that cost of the intermediary, right? That cost of running the apprenticeship program and recruiting apprentices, placing them. And it's benchmarked to be $3,500 per apprentice per year, prorated to the month, along with a $1,000 per apprentice completion bonus. And this funding goes to the entity that is the program sponsor for an apprenticeship program, which could be a lot of different types of entities. But really, whoever is doing this work can tap into this funding of supporting apprentices. And then the second category of funding is the training funding. And this is at $8.82 per training hour and is benchmarked to RSI, related and supplemental instruction. It's also intended to be benchmarked to the community college FTS base rate. So the idea here is that we're creating various mechanisms to make sure that we're covering that cost in both the startup phase and also in the ongoing sustain and scale phase. I wanted to be sure to talk a little bit about this Student Aid Commission, the Learning Aligned Employment Program, because this is a rare source of funding that can actually offset the wages for apprentices, which is pretty exciting. We're very excited about this funding source. And so this funding source, in the case that an apprentice is, it's not technically for apprentices. It's a work-study program. However, I think apprenticeship can be layered into this very gracefully and achieving so many of the outcomes of what they're looking to do with this, which is to create earn and learn mechanisms and to essentially subsidize that earning part. And if it's a public institution, it can be a 90% wage offset, and with a for-profit, it's a 50% wage offset. So I encourage you to learn a bit more about this funding mechanism. And of course, I wanted to be sure to touch on the use of apportionment funding for apprenticeship. And this is a relatively recent development in the community college world, that FTES could be used to pay for apprenticeship education. And very importantly is that no apprentice should be charged that $46 per unit enrollment fee. But that doesn't mean that you as a college are losing revenue. So what happens is that a college has to choose which mechanism to utilize for funding the apprenticeship education, either FTES or RSI or the AIFT, but as you'll see, they're all benchmarked at the same dollar amount. And so what's very important is that when you waive the fees for an apprentice, you as a college are not losing any funding. And the way that works is that when a college is serving a student, right, they are getting a certain amount, an FTES amount, for serving that student. And when they charge enrollment fees, those enrollment fees are collected by the college and then kept by the college. And whatever is the balance is what the state pays the college, right? So whenever there's any kind of mandated fee waiver, the college is still getting that full amount. It just means that they're not collecting those enrollment fees. But ultimately, the college is not losing any money by waiving the fee. And this is true with apprenticeship. It's also true with the California Promise and other fee waiver situations. And for those of you who want to go into the weeds, these are for the particular forms where these two things are reported. And so this is really important that with this policy change, it means that we can waive the fees for apprentices in 4 credit classes in the community college system. And I hope that we're doing that more and more to both create this sustainable equation of funding for colleges and also getting more apprentices for credit education that accompanies their apprenticeship program. So the important thing is that no financing is lost when you waive those fees. Next, I wanted to touch very quickly on related and supplemental instruction funding, which in the last budget cycle was increased to $8.82 per training hour. And as I mentioned before, it really aligns with the 4-credit community college rate. Before it was benchmarked to the non-credit rate. So this is great to bring that parity to our education system that includes apprenticeship education. And the mechanics of this are essentially that the Department of Finance establishes the funding amount for community college districts and LEAs based on the actual hours of training reported in the previous year. And the Chancellor's office is then communicating back once the budget process is complete, how much funding was actually allocated, and therefore how much funding will be allocated to those entities that have received RSI funding and reported their hours as such. And the Chancellor's office makes those payments. And then there's a series of reporting because initially it's a budget amount and then it's an actual amount. And there is a sort of a recalc process that makes all the numbers right ultimately. So this gives you a little bit of a sense of the behind the scenes mechanics of RSI funding. And finally, I just want to be sure to highlight the benefits of using work experience in the community college context, because it's really a win-win for all entities involved, in the sense that if you can build work experience into your apprenticeship program in the community college context, it's a benefit to the student because they're getting more community college credit for the work that they're doing and the learning that they're doing on the job. It also benefits the college because you're getting more FTES, and I think that can be part of that sustainable equation. And you're also getting those strong outcomes on the students that you're serving. And then finally, it certainly benefits employers because apprentices are earning credit for that learning that they're doing on the job. So I hope that this has given you some tips for how to create a sustainable equation for your community college apprenticeship program. Thank you.